Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
I walked slowly. As if my feet were more aware than my mind of the gravity of that moment. There were less than 24 hours left, less than a day until I had to stand before everyone I knew and say yes. Until I had to promise forever to a man who deserved it. And still, each step I took on the cracked city pavement felt like the opening line of a story whose ending was not yet written. My purse was clutched in my hand, the leather cool against my clammy skin. I held it like a shield, a flimsy defense against what, exactly? I didn't know. I crossed the street, the afternoon light casting long, skeletal shadows from the buildings. My destination was a small cafe with a faded green awning. A place I used to frequent years ago. That place carried more than just the smell of dark roast coffee and steamed milk. It held memories. Memories I believed, until that very moment, were dormant. Fossils pressed into the pages of a life I had already closed. I told myself it was just for a cappuccino. Just that. A final, silent goodbye to the girl I used to be before I became Mrs. Graham Forrester. A good man. A kind man. A man whose love was a gentle harbor, not a raging storm. But deep down, in that quiet, honest place we rarely visit, I knew there was another reason. And when my eyes met the man sitting at the corner table, the reason became terrifyingly clear. Julian, my ex-fiancé. The same Julian who had left 3 years ago for a job in Paris. The same man who, without much warning, had simply ended us. A clean break, he'd called it. It had felt more like an amputation. I hesitated, my body froze mid-step, the little bell above the cafe door tinkling mockingly. I could turn around. I could pretend I hadn't seen him. I could retreat back into the safe, predictable light of my almost perfect life. But it was already too late. He had seen me. His gaze, that intense, familiar gaze that had once mapped every inch of my soul, traveled across the crowded room and landed on me. There was no surprise in his eyes. Only recognition. A strange, unnerving familiarity. He stood up, with that same fluid grace he always had, as if he knew I would show up, as if he had been waiting. I approached his table slowly. Each step was a deliberate act of will against the screaming instinct to flee. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I couldn't tell if it was anger, or longing, or pure, unadulterated fear. Fear of hearing what I didn't want to hear. And then he said it, without preamble, without excuses. Call off the wedding, Cordelia. His voice was low, but it cut through the clatter of porcelain and quiet chatter of the cafe. I still love you, he said. I came back for you. Those words, they didn't ask for permission to enter. They invaded. A siege against the carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart for the last 3 years. I sank into the chair opposite him. My knees felt weak. I tried to laugh, a brittle, unconvincing sound. I tried to brush it off, to make sense of the sheer audacity of it all. Julian, you can't just... I can, he interrupted, and his voice didn't tremble. He was certain, utterly, maddeningly certain. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. Leaving you for a career. It was the biggest mistake of my life. No promotion, no success, nothing made up for your absence. He spoke of the last 2 years. Of trying to move on, of dating other women, only to realize that the emptiness inside him wasn't about a lack of direction. It was about me. It had always been about me. I bit my lip, the metallic taste of blood a sharp anchor in the dizzying sea of his words. I needed to leave. Right now. There was a dress hanging in my closet, a beautiful ivory gown waiting for me. A loving fiancé, Graham, probably picking up his tuxedo at this very moment. A life, a whole life, under construction. But Julian, he knew the right words. He knew the right silences. And in that moment, he wasn't asking for a second chance. He was demanding it. He was reclaiming something he believed was still his. I tried to rationalize. I thought of my plans with Graham. The new apartment overlooking the park, the guest list, the honeymoon in Italy, our future. But every logical argument got lost in the flood of memory. The memory of kisses shared with Julian in the pouring rain, of afternoons spent on a worn-out couch watching old movies. The first time he told me he loved me, his voice thick with an emotion that felt as real as the ground beneath my feet. Everything was so confusing. And his gaze, that look, it stripped away the years, the heartbreak, the new life I had built. He reached for my hand across the small wooden table. His touch was electric, a jolt of pure, undiluted history. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Just one more time, Delia, he whispered, using the old nickname that no one else had ever called me. And that's how I found myself standing up. That's how I found myself following him out of the cafe, leaving my half-finished cappuccino to grow cold on the table. Neither of us said a word on the way to his apartment. The silence in the taxi was thick, filled with a gentle, terrifying tension. It was almost complicit. My mind was a whirlwind of justifications and protests, but my body was still, resigned, moving on an autopilot programmed by a love I thought had died. When we entered his apartment, I looked around. A lot had changed. The furniture was different, sleeker, more expensive. The art on the walls was abstract and cold. But he hadn't changed. Not really. Beneath the tailored suit and the faint scent of Parisian cologne, Julian was the same man I had fallen in love with. Intense, impulsive, passionate. He stood before me, the city lights twinkling behind him through the large window. "If you want," he said, his voice soft, "this can be the last time. A final goodbye." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle in the air. "But if you want to stay, we can start over. Right here, right now." I didn't respond with words. I responded with my body. I closed the distance between us and kissed him. It was a kiss of urgency, of pain, of a desperate, soul-deep longing that 3 years of separation had failed to extinguish. It was a collision, a violent, beautiful, catastrophic collision of decisions that were never fully resolved. The connection was immediate, familiar, almost cruel in its intensity. He was a language my body had never forgotten how to speak. And when I finally fell asleep next to him hours later, wrapped in sheets that smelled of him, I thought I could bury it all by morning. I told myself this was a fever, a momentary madness, a final exorcism of a ghost that had haunted me for too long. I could wake up, walk away, and step back into my life with Graham, carrying this secret like a stone in my gut forever. A penance I would pay in silence. But while I slept, he moved. I was in that deep, dreamless space just before true sleep. I vaguely registered a shift in the bed, a shadow detaching itself from the mattress. Through slitted, heavy eyelids, I saw the faint glow of his phone's screen illuminate his face. He was looking at me. A smile played on his lips, but even in the dim light, I could see it didn't reach his eyes. It was a smile without joy. There was a soft, almost inaudible click. I thought nothing of it. A notification, an email. My mind, clouded with exhaustion and emotion, drifted back to sleep, untroubled, unaware that a single, simple action had just sealed my fate. A photo, simple, raw, and definitive. The story was far from over. I woke up confused. For a few seconds, my mind refused to process where I was. The light was wrong. The scent in the air was wrong. Only after turning my head and seeing Julian, sleeping peacefully beside me, did everything come rushing back like an avalanche. The conversation at the cafe, the silent invitation, the rushed, reckless decision, and now, my naked body under the still crumpled sheets. I sat up slowly, drawing a deep, shaky breath, trying to push away the sickening feeling that I had just destroyed something precious, something irreplaceable. That night had been a mistake. I knew it with a clarity that only the harsh morning light can bring. It was a mistake driven by legitimate emotions, yes. By vivid memories, by a part of me that, foolishly, still believed Julian was the one. But there, with the daylight exposing every detail of what we had done, it was all so undeniably wrong. Julian was still sleeping, and that bothered me. He seemed so at peace, as if everything was finally right in his world. I, on the other hand, felt torn into 1,000 pieces. The anguish of betraying someone as good as Graham. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I dressed carefully, my movements stealthy, avoiding any noise that might wake him. I gathered my clothes from the floor where they had been carelessly discarded. I tied my hair into a quick, messy bun and searched for my purse. Before leaving, I found a notepad on his coffee table. My handwriting trembled, but the message I wrote was direct. I thanked him for everything. For the closure, I guess. But I made it clear there was no room for a fresh start. There was a wedding waiting for me, a life. And even after what had happened, I still wanted that wedding to take place. I needed it to. As I walked back to my own apartment along the awakening city sidewalks, my conscience was screaming. There was no way to pretend nothing had happened. The decision to go through with the wedding had been made, but regret consumed every thought. I spent the rest of the morning in a silent, self-imposed prison, trying to focus on the final preparations. The dress had already been delivered. The bouquet was ready. The banquet hall was being decorated just as I had always dreamed. From the outside, everything seemed to be under control. But inside me, it was as if an earthquake was about to break the ground beneath my feet. And then my phone buzzed. It was Graham. "Morning, my love. Can't believe today is the day. I can't wait to see you at the altar." His trust in me was so blind, so complete, he would never suspect a thing. To him, I was the woman of his dreams. Loyal, a companion, ready to live happily ever after. I held the phone with trembling hands. I couldn't reply immediately. I knew any words I typed would be a lie. They would be false. A poison seeping into the foundation of the life we were supposed to build. Deep down, I wished I could erase what happened with Julian. Erase that moment, that night, from existence entirely. Hours later, already at the hotel suite, reserved for the ceremony, I was a finished product. Made up, styled, dressed like a princess in a fairy tale. When I looked in the mirror, I saw an image I no longer recognized. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. The white dress, which once symbolized purity and promise, now felt like a costume. Suffocating. A beautiful lie I was wearing on my skin. Still, I took a deep breath. I lifted my head. I decided to go through with it. What I had done was a detour, a terrible flaw in my character that I promised myself I would bury deep in my soul, forever. What mattered at that moment was not to falter, not to hesitate in front of Graham. I believed I could start over from the moment I said, "I do." I was so naive. On the other side of the city, while I was preparing to walk down the aisle, Julian was looking at his phone. He scrolled through the gallery, past photos of Paris, of cityscapes, of his new life, and then he stopped. One picture stood out, me, lying in his bed, completely surrendered to sleep, the soft features of someone who had just lived something intense. He observed the photo with cold, calculating eyes. It wasn't affection. It wasn't longing. It was appraisal. He put the phone in his pocket, took a final sip of his black coffee, and walked out of his apartment with firm steps and a single, chilling certainty. This story would have a second act, the most impactful one, the most cruel. I had no idea. I had no idea that at that very moment, the past I thought I had just put to bed was about to collide with my present in the most public and devastating way imaginable. I had no idea that the price for one night of weakness would cost more than I could ever imagine. The ceremony began. Everything was perfectly rehearsed. The chairs were occupied by smiling guests. The musicians played a gentle, hopeful melody. The officiant read the opening words with a calm serenity. And Graham looked at me with such admiration, such complete and utter trust. I walked slowly toward the altar, escorted by my father. Despite the smile I had plastered on my face, my heart felt heavy, as if every step were a sentence. Still, I kept up appearances. Everyone's eyes were on me. All of it. It seemed like the realization of a dream planned for months. But I was carrying a truth on my back that could ruin everything in an instant. When I reached the altar and stood beside Graham, our eyes met. I felt a lump form in my throat. He took my hand, his grip firm, as if wanting to seal a pact right then and there. There was such sincerity in his touch, such surrender. It crushed me inside. The moment when the vows would be exchanged was approaching. The guests fell silent. I kept my gaze fixed, trying to protect myself from my own guilt with sheer concentration. But then, Graham raised one arm. Politely, calmly, he asked for the ceremony to be paused. Without changing his tone, he asked for the music to be cut off. He signaled to one of the technicians at the back of the hall. Then, he looked up at the large projection screen that had been set up to show a slideshow of our happy memories during the reception. Some people exchanged confused glances. I felt a cold knot of dread begin to form in my stomach. It took me a few seconds to realize what was happening. The screen lit up. The image appeared slowly, pixel by pixel, coming into focus. And when it showed up in full, I felt the ground disappear from beneath my feet. The photo, the one I never even knew existed. There, in front of all those people, it was projected, unmistakably. Me. In Julian's bed, the sheet pulled up just to my waist. My hair a messy halo on the pillow, My eyes closed in sleep, my body clearly exposed. The betrayal had been turned into criminal evidence. An uncomfortable, deafening silence fell over the room. Then came the whispers, the gasps. Some covered their mouths with their hands. Others let out small murmurs, almost indignant. I turned my face toward Graham, a desperate, silent plea in my eyes, as if there was still time to prevent the disaster, but he had already let go of my hand. His expression was sober. No yelling. No insults. Just a profound, soul-shattering disappointment. He took 2 steps forward, looked out at our guests, and said, his voice steady and clear, "The truth, no matter how painful, always finds a way to be heard." Then, he turned back to me. His eyes were not filled with hate, but with an awful, empty sorrow. "I hope it was worth it, Cordelia." With that, he descended the altar steps and walked out through the main aisle, without ever looking back. I tried to run after him. I tried to scream his name, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Tears streamed uncontrollably down my face, carving paths through my perfect makeup. The people who, just minutes earlier, had admired me as a beautiful bride, now stared as if I were a walking fraud. Graham's mother was crying in the front row. His brother held their father firmly, who just shook his head, again and again, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. I slowly stepped down from the altar, ignoring the stairs, and exited through a side door. My veil was half undone. My face was smeared with mascara. The shame surpassed any physical pain I could ever imagine. I didn't know how Julian had done it. I didn't know how he had gotten that image to Graham until it was displayed for everyone to see. It was as if I had been emotionally stripped bare in front of my entire world. Trust is a delicate structure. It can take years to build, but only minutes to destroy. Irreversibly. And Graham, who until that moment had been the symbol of stability and goodness in my life, left without hesitation, without hearing explanations, without seeking reasons, because to him, the image said everything that needed to be said. I spent hours locked in that empty hotel room. The silence was larger than the room itself. It was a living, breathing entity, suffocating me. The phone in my hands felt like a bomb, the link between the chaos that had just unfolded and the only person who could offer any explanation. Julian. When I finally mustered the courage to call, each ring of the phone seemed to push me deeper into my own guilt. He answered with an odd calmness, no surprise in his voice. It was as if he already knew I would call. I tried to control myself, but my voice came out as a shaky, broken whisper. "Why?" I breathed into the phone. "Why would you do this to me, Julian?" On the other end of the line, he stayed silent for a few seconds, a long, heavy pause that stretched into an eternity. When he finally spoke, his words cut deeper than any shout ever could. "Because you destroyed me first, Cordelia." His tone was direct, without apparent anger, but there was something heavier there, something colder, accumulated pain. "Back then," he continued, his voice flat, devoid of the passion I had felt just the night before, "I found out. I discovered everything. I felt the blood drain from my face." What are you talking about?" "The messages," he said. "The secret meetings. I knew it wasn't just a one-time thing with that guy from your art history class. And do you know what the worst part is, Delia? I still wanted to marry you." My breath hitched. He knew. All this time, he knew. "I had plans," he went on, his voice a monotone of remembered agony. "I believed in us. But the betrayal. Knowing you were with someone else while I was picking out engagement rings, it shattered me. And even so, I stayed. I pretended I didn't know. I pretended I could forget it, that our love was strong enough to survive it." The words choked in my throat. What I thought had been a confused, youthful mistake, a secret I had carried alone, had actually been a living wound inside him all along. "But no one," he said, his voice finally cracking with a sliver of raw emotion, "can live a lie for that long without being consumed from the inside." I tried to explain, to say I had been confused back then, that our relationship had hit a rough patch, that I didn't know how much he still meant to me, but he didn't want to hear excuses. "I loved you so much that I chose to keep the pain to myself," he said. "I left for Paris without a fight, without confronting you, without making you feel the weight of what you had caused. I was a coward. I thought I could forget you on the other side of the ocean, but the more time passed, the more I fed that pain inside me. It grew. It festered." His confession wasn't spoken with rage. He spoke like someone who had suffered for too long and had simply grown tired of pretending everything was okay. He explained that our reunion at the cafe wasn't by chance, that when he heard about my wedding to a good, stable man, he realized it was time. Time to return the anguish he had carried alone for so long. You always got the happy ending, Cordelia. The one I never did. You betrayed me, and you walked away as if I were just a phase in your life. You got to pretend nothing ever happened. I wanted you to feel it. Just once. I wanted you to feel your world crumbling around you, right at the moment you thought everything was finally in its perfect place. Doe. I was speechless. There was no defense for that. As much as I had tried to convince myself that the past was a closed chapter, it now returned like a storm, tearing down every single facade I had built over the years. Julian didn't want revenge out of simple pride. He wanted emotional justice. He wanted to balance the scales of a suffering he had carried alone for far too long, and by projecting that photo in front of everyone, he didn't just destroy my wedding. He exposed the rotten root of the tree, the one I had pretended never existed. I hung up the phone without knowing what to think or what to feel. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of the television, trying to recognize the woman staring back at me. Because if all of this truly started years ago, with my own betrayal, then what remained now was only the distorted, fractured reflection of who I could have been. He had left because of love, but he returned because of pain. And his pain had now become my nightmare. Time passed, but I remained trapped in that same moment. Days turned into weeks. Familiar faces disappeared from my life. Invitations ceased. The carefully planned future I had mapped out down to the smallest detail was ripped away, like a paper backdrop in a play that had been canceled. It was as if everything I had built, my career, my relationships, my reputation, dissolved in front of everyone. Friends, family, coworkers. And what remained was a version of me that I no longer recognized. The decisive, confident woman, ready to build a life alongside someone good like Graham, had been erased the moment her worst choices came to light. And unlike what I had imagined, Graham's silence was worse than any shout. No angry calls, no bitter text messages, no questions. Just emptiness. A goodbye that was never said aloud, but was implied in the total, crushing absence of his presence. I tried to start over, but every attempt at rebuilding ran into eyes that already knew too much. People who saw me through a filter I myself had created years ago. The betrayal was no longer just an episode. It had become my identity. And the weight of that was heavier than I ever imagined I could bear. The pain of being exposed. The public shame of being reduced to a single image projected for hundreds of eyes. It all came in waves. Even on the quietest nights, social media felt like a minefield. My name would pop up in vague references, in sarcastic posts mocking stories like mine. There was no more space to justify anything, not even to try to fix it. And it was at this point that I understood that some scars don't heal. They mark you. They remain to remind you. At some point, I heard through the grapevine that Julian had moved again. To another state, on the West Coast. I heard he opened a photography studio and was doing well. People commented that he seemed lighter, as if he had finally left something heavy behind. But I knew the truth. He hadn't left it behind. He had returned it to its rightful owner, and in that gesture, as cruel and devastating as it was, there was something I finally understood. It's not just about what we do to others, but what we leave inside of them. The pain Julian carried for years didn't vanish. It matured, and when it returned, it came as a lesson. Not as a simple plea for revenge, but as a mirror. A mirror where I, Cordelia, finally had to see myself completely. Not every story ends with reconciliation. Not every mistake is forgotten with the passage of time. Sometimes, the consequence of an error doesn't arrive immediately. It waits. It watches, and when you least expect it, when you are at your most vulnerable and most happy, it demands payment, with interest, and when it comes, it brings with it the exact weight of what was ignored. Julian chose to leave in silence all those years ago, but he returned when he saw the moment was perfect to show me that